So welcome to this session. We're very excited about our panel today. I'm actually opening this session on behalf of Elisa Tonda, who's not able to join us. But my name is Leila Petrie. I'm really the moderator. So I'm the CEO of an organisation called 2050, which helps some of the large organisations in the world work on sustainability challenges. But I've been working very closely with UNEP on the report that we'll touch on today. So that is hopefully why I'm able to represent this work and share a little bit about what UNEP has been doing on sustainable textiles. So on behalf of UNEP, which I'm very lucky to do, and the co-organisers, the Government of Kenya, Stockholm Environment Institute, we welcome you to this Action Hub event, using the clothes we love to protect the nature we need. It's a particular honour to be part of this Stockholm Plus 50 event, because it marks the 50th anniversary of UNEP, which I'm sure you're aware, and it's a time to reflect on both the progress achieved and the progress yet to achieve in protecting our environment. We're currently facing a triple planetary crisis: the climate crisis, the biodiversity and nature crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. Our unsustainable production and consumption decisions and practices are the drivers of this planetary crisis. If we manage to rethink that consumption and production system, we can create a positive impact to address this crisis. By bringing circularity and sustainability across the textile value chain, we can drive positive change. Textiles is a particularly important sector as it's used by virtually everyone in the world every day, and it's important to the economy, to livelihoods, to culture and to daily lives. It's also very complex, with SMEs being a large proportion of the value chain and driving production across many countries. And consumers are increasingly accustomed to new, faster pace of product availability. The theme of Stockholm Plus 50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity, resonates particularly with today's event. Environmental impacts are many and occur at each point of the textile value chain. The textile sector, for example, emits between 2 and 8% of the world's greenhouse gases, depending on which study you believe, and it's responsible for at least 9% of microplastic pollution in our ocean through microfiber shedding. Of around 3,500 substances used in textile production, 21% were found to be hazardous to human health. This is exacerbated by the fact that a lot of times when production is happening, there's not good wastewater treatment available to actually reduce the emission of that toxic chemicals to the environment. Additionally, this value chain has deep social impacts, with women being particularly vulnerable as they represent a 68% segment of the garment workforce, and they're 41% of the overall textile sector workforce. Finally, our current unsustainable patterns of textile consumption and production lead to an annual material loss of 100 billion USD due to underutilization. So even when we make lots of stuff, we don't actually use it effectively, and that's not an optimal way to design a system. The science of these impacts is clear and it's plentiful. So what we need now is a systematic take on what we need each able to influence individually and collectively. UNEP already has strong work on textiles in a number of areas. The first is the support of member states, including global dialogue between policymakers to forge cooperative transnational efforts on circular textiles, also in relation to trade policies. This is something that UNEP are already enabling through the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, jointly with UNEP. The second piece of work is the efforts on circular business models, focusing on SME-sized enterprises in developing countries. The EU-funded project Innovative Business Practices and Economic Models in the Textile Value Chain, not surprisingly shortened to INTEX, is providing such support to SMEs in Kenya, South Africa and Tunisia. This is closely connected to reorientating consumer appetite for such business models at scale, so that, for example, using textile repair services or buying second-hand becomes the norm. For this to occur, consumers require meaningful engagement and reliable information, and fashion communication must meet these requirements. This need was recognised at the last Climate COP, where a new high-level communication commitment was included in the renewed Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, following consultations facilitated by UNEP and the UNFCCC. UNEP is now working on a sustainable fashion communications playbook to provide guidance to practitioners on how to align consumer-facing fashion communication to their climate targets, while also helping to address wider sustainability goals. The third action that UNEP is already taking on sustainable textiles is the creation of data and science, which helps with informed decision-making. Under the UNEP 4 Resolution 1, UNEP has a mandate to provide qualitative analysis of the environmental, economic and social outcomes of diverse, sustainable and circular pathways for the textile industry. This analysis can support both public and private stakeholders in prioritising actions and understanding potential global trade-offs from specific interventions. And this will hopefully be available in 2023. At the same time, UNEP is creating and sharing life cycle data needed to help decision makers using in the textiles value chain. One example is with SMEs that are part of the previously mentioned InTex project in building capacity to help them measure their product environmental footprint in line with the EC methodology and enabling dataset sharing via the global LCA data access network. So, many of you know that in addition to all this work, we are finalising a report called Sustainability and Circularity in the Textile Value Chain, Recommendations for Action and a Global Roadmap. So this will be released in the coming months. We're finalising it now. This report was built on all the available science and stakeholder consultations, and essentially what we've done is outline 3 key priorities for the sector to adopt. One is shifting consumption patterns. The other is improved practices, and the final is infrastructure investment. So these 3 interconnected dimensions are the key to transformation across the textiles value chain, and they're mutually reinforcing as well as key focus areas. So, for example, if we look at shifting consumption patterns, this is crucial not only to move the sector towards circularity, but also ensuring that that shift is then permanent. So what we need to do is create the demand for circularity from consumers and to support the development of new business models and product design to meet that requirement. The Global Fashion Agenda's recent report suggests that shifting consumer behaviours to become more sustainable can directly reduce the fashion industry's carbon emissions by 21%. So there's a huge potential in this shift. And actually, if you shift consumer mindsets, a lot of things start to automatically change within the value chain itself. At the same time, how products are designed, what kind of business models are offered, and how aspirations are set could radically reduce pressure on the production system. So, for example, reducing the need for key inputs such as cotton or other raw materials. This will help the industry meet goals such as net zero emissions, elimination of water pollution, and a biodiversity net positive balance by 2050. So, to make these shifts in consumption patterns a reality, we need to, first of all, scale sustainable and circular business models globally. So really offer those business models through the private sector and make sure that they are fundamentally available, not just in the West, but globally. We need to address unnecessary textile consumption through behaviour change, so really engage with the ways in which consumers set expectations, how they are given messaging by influencers, by the media, by each other, to really create a shift in the perception of what good looks like in sustainable consumption. And there's an intersection with improved practices, as you can see. So in that intersection, we need to also design textile products in a way that's going to minimise impact and support circularity. So design choices have a ripple effect all along production systems. If you design in a smart way, you can actually edit out a lot of different impacts across production systems. And then also look at product care and longevity. So really think about how we can design products, we can consider an approach to product and business model that helps people care for their products more easily, the way we can engage them on their behaviour, so helping people to have lower impact washing, drying behaviours, or even creating products that start to make that process obsolete, potentially, but also thinking about longevity. So if you buy something, use it 100 times rather than 5 times. And then finally, linking to that other segment of infrastructure investment, we really need to invest in infrastructure and systems that are going to divert waste from landfill. So quite often there's a kind of make, use, bin model that's used, a linear approach to the value chain, but actually part of the challenge is there's no system to pick up used textiles in a lot of countries, and it's not very formalised often if there is a system. So we need much more investment from governments, from municipalities, from the waste collection organisations to create more accessible solutions for textile waste collection, and then have mechanisms by which that can be sorted and used to provide closed-loop systems ultimately. So, there's quite a lot to do, but hopefully this gives us a nice, clear pathway that we can then assemble everybody to have a conversation about what happens next. So, with all of this in mind, we're very happy to benefit from the presence of broad and deep expertise and insights today from our panel. So our roadmap report makes it clear that we'll need to collaborate with all stakeholders across the value chain, and we'll need to co-create the transition towards circularity. So many are already working on specific challenges in the textile sector, including many experts present with us today. But nevertheless, what we see is that the existing progress doesn't yet meet what we need. It's not ambitious enough, or it's not driving enough fast change. So we all know that there's an urgency to our actions, that we need to drive ever more ambitious outcomes. So really what we want to touch on today is how we can shift that needle even faster. And UNEP itself, I think it's okay for me to say this, they know that they can't do all of this on their own. So they're very happy and have prioritised actions to collaborate with their partners. So, for example, amongst UN agencies, they're already coordinating closely with the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion. And one of the things that they understood again and again from consultations is that for this report, global coordination is the big gap around circularity in particular. So we have a lot of existing initiatives focusing on specific topics or specific parts of the value chain, but actually there's a little bit of a gap now in terms of a coordination mechanism that, for example, can help coordinate the dialogue between policymakers on circular textiles, or can help facilitate the conversation between policymakers and the private sector, particularly thinking about those global dynamics, making sure that we don't create solutions that create even bigger problems down the road. So really having that global perspective and creating coordination functions that will help facilitate those conversations about global dynamics. So what we want to do is hear from our panellists today about what their work has been, and also what they see as the potential roadmap and future pathway towards a coordinated global approach to sustainable and circular textiles. So we look forward to discussing with you today the concrete steps to be taken at an international level to address gaps and scale the transformation to the level needed, with a focus on holistic actions for sustainable consumption patterns and circular business models. So I'm delighted to now welcome the panel to the stage. So I would like to invite up Dr. Ayu Macharia, who's the Director of the Environmental Education and Awareness Unit in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Government of Kenya. Ms. Federica Marchioni, who's the CEO of the Global Fashion Agenda. Mr. Kartikeya Sarabhai, who's the Director at the Centre of Environment Education in India. Ms. Meta Rangard Lund, who's the Technical Officer for Green Jobs at the ILO, International Labour Organization. And Mr. Zaher Ahmed Kaushik, who's the Asia Pacific Regional Facilitator, Children and Youth Major Group of UNEP. Thank you very much, everyone. Please take a seat behind me. Yeah. In whichever order is it? Oh, you have one already. Okay. Let me take this here. Thanks very much. Okay. Thank you very much, panel. Welcome. There's quite a few, if you want to go in the middle, see. There's quite a few people and not a massive stage, so I will shuffle down here. Okay. Welcome, everybody. So, we have the mic over there, I think. Do you want to grab that, Federica? Oh. Perfect. And conveniently, you are the first question, actually. It's perfect. So, Federica, you will have heard that UNEP's upcoming report has 3 major priorities. What can you hear? Not plugged in. Yeah. You hear me now? Fantastic. So, we have just seen that the new UNEP report has 3 major priorities around infrastructure, around changing practices, and around shifting consumption patterns. So, GFA will release a report on the priorities for stakeholders in setting science-based sustainability strategies and ambitions shortly. So, how would you see the priorities in your report? Do they strike the similar tone as the findings in this report from UNEP?
Hello everyone, and thank you for having me. It's a very crucial moment, so we call it a new era. I'll tell you later more about it. Our forthcoming publication, the GFA Monitor, is intended to be a resource to guide fashion leaders towards a net positive fashion industry, an industry that will put back in the society, in the global economy, in the environment, and more than it takes. And this is a vision that we share with UNEP, actually, and where we find a lot of commonalities. And for importantly, set fact-based sustainability strategies and take action. The GFA Monitor builds upon the Fashion CEO agenda that we released in 2018, which is a framework where we wanted to highlight the important priorities for the fashion industry, which are basically 5. 2 environmental, 2 social, and in the middle, the circular economy. So we have better wage system, secure work environment, resource stewardship, smart material choices, and circular system. So with the report, the important things is we wanted to make sure that we could work with all the agency, all the NGOs, all the actors, the industry leaders that are taking initiatives, programs, creating tools and action in the industry. So the report is actually a result of a multi-stakeholder engagement in the industry. And the most important thing is that we want the report to be a tool of action. And all the priorities that are addressed in the UNEP publication are actually included in our report and vice versa. So this is a great news, actually, right? Because we know the issue, and we also highlighted the possible solution. As I said, is a very much tool of action because we listed all those possible solutions, such as, for example, replacing conventional materials with recycle and regenerative one, improving purchasing practices to promote workplace health and safety, and most importantly, establishing alliances to unlock many things, but in this particular case, it's investment for circular infrastructure and green energy programs. I'm saying and keep saying alliances because now we have next week in Copenhagen our summit called Alliances for a New Era. I firmly believe, and everyone at the Global Fashion Agenda knows that without alliances, we cannot tackle those major issues, especially if you have a long-term plan and a big ambition, like we do all have. So we're working also with, and many of other NGOs and industry leaders. In fact, what we want to promote and keep promoting is the collaboration among us as also NGOs, but also, for instance, academia, and trying to leverage best practices. We believe that fashion is about change. You can let it happen or make it happen, and at GFA we're all about to make it happen as you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Actually, yeah, I'm going next. Perfect. You've self-assembled in the absolute perfect order. We've heard a lot about the current linear model, and that linear model, although there are major downsides to it, it does also provide a lot of development opportunities for some countries. It provides a lot of jobs. So what is your view on how we can shift to a more circular model in a way that doesn't reduce those benefits, that actually helps facilitate further benefits for livelihoods, for development globally, because that is one of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Leila, and thank you to UNEP for inviting the ILO. I'm really happy that they are inviting the social dimension and the jobs dimension in these discussions about circularity. And I think now Federica has just mentioned that even in their report they highlighted 2 social elements, all related to employment. And what we know in the ILO is that the link between circularity and employment is perhaps even more profound than in other types of transitions. So our data suggests that if we successfully transition into a circular economy by 2030, 78 million jobs could be created worldwide. But at the same time, 71 million jobs will be lost. So, I mean, while the quick math is a positive number at the end of that equation, it doesn't change the fact that this is a huge shift to the labor market. So I would say that there is a clear narrative of a positive transition from linear to circular, but we have to make sure that those that lose their job or stand to lose their job also stand to benefit from the transition and can be a part of the circular economy. So that's what we in the ILO call a just transition. So coupling ambitious climate action with the social dimension and social justice. So I want to highlight just the Just Transition guidelines that we have. They are from 2015, and they provide a guide set of guiding framework for policymakers, workers and employers on how to transition to environmental sustainable economies and societies for all. And they cover 9 policy areas. And I think that kind of underlines how complex a task this is. I know that we will probably be able to talk a little bit about this complexity in a moment, but I just want to underline that in order to ensure that this is a just transition, the guidelines also highlight a few guiding principles, and one of those are social dialogue and social justice and the inclusion of social partners. And I just want to translate that perhaps to layman's words with people who don't necessarily work with labor issues on a daily basis. Basically think about it as the importance of including those stakeholders that have most at stake. So the actors within the world of work, such as workers and employers and governments, they have everything to gain from such a transition, and they have the power to change such a transition. So when you ask about how do we make sure that we don't leave anyone behind in the transition, make sure to work with those that have most to gain and the power to change. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Zuhair? This is working out better than I could have hoped. So, as we already touched on, there's a huge employment role from the textile sector. So lots of people are employed, lots of jobs, quite often they're young people. So what is your view on how youth can be engaged, not just in kind of being employed, but also maybe taking up entrepreneurial roles and kind of innovating themselves to kind of create this shift towards circularity?
Okay, so I understand that most of the textile and apparels are produced in the global south, so I'm talking from the global south.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in the global south countries, you'll find that the ease of doing business, if you go through the index of ease of doing business, you'll find that it's quite difficult to do business and create enterprises in the global south, especially in a country like Bangladesh, where we have to somehow create new global and national policy frameworks to, encourage youth involvement in the green entrepreneurship and the businesses. And as you're saying that how young people can be engaged more in greening the textile sector. So the first will be obviously the education. Education can only be the solution of all environmental, problems and consequences. So we have to somehow introduce a kind of education which actually, empower young people to take the action what they actually want to do. Because in the global south countries, the young people, they live the life to, fulfill the expectations of other people, of the older generations. From our childhood, we are told to, pursue some kind of jobs. Which is not, dreamed by ourselves. Like during my childhood, I was told to be an engineer. I literally didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to be something else. So these things, the vocational education and the more skill-based training should be introduced in our education system. And other thing that I want to introduce is we should improve the ecosystem of business in global south countries, because I have found that the bureaucratic process of doing the businesses and creating enterprises is quite tough to for young people who doesn't have any experience of knowledge of confronting those kind of things to overcome and create green business or jobs for other young people. So the governments of the global south, they should actually, provide incentives to the young people. They can actually offer seed funds, and they can also, offer tax exemption for the young people who actually want to be the green entrepreneurs in the textile sector. And also, not only that, some of the UN agencies like ILO and UNDP in the global south countries, they are really providing a lot of entrepreneurship funds and providing incubation support. So these agencies should take this green textile sector into consideration and provide, more support to the young. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so next question to Ayub. So this is really about, so Kenya has an exciting textile sector, and it has the potential to skip some of the phases that some other countries have gone through because it's quite new and it's quite SME based. So how does the Kenyan government support this transition to go not through the whole pattern that some other countries have had to go through of linear and then circular, but maybe go straight towards a more circular model? Is that something that's feasible?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. The Kenyan textile sector is linear.
Okay. So we can't. Okay, good answer.
As an environmental ministry, we are keen to see that the sector transitions to circular. And so how we are supporting them is we are sure that Rome was not built in a day, and so they need a lot of support. Some of the support that they need is looking at the whole value chain. We needed to number one, map it. And so there are several areas in the farms, making sure that they do not degrade the environment. In the industry, the factory, that is where most of our challenges are, because they have not invested in the right technology. And so you'll find that like the dye industry, where they put in other colors, you find the discharge is colored. Now, when you go there as an inspector, will you close down such a facility? You realize that the government has come up with a compliance assistant system where we advise them on what needs to be done in the short term, the medium term, the long term, so that they reduce their impact on the environment. Currently, we have gone further to support them by coming up with a policy on sustainable waste management, because we have a lot of waste challenges from the sector. And what we have done with that policy is that we have mapped now the value chain for waste management. And what we would like to achieve initially is to raise the value of waste. And you raise the value of waste by promoting segregation at source. If the waste was segregated at source, at least the value would go up. It would usually be picked for upcycling, for recycling, for reuse. These products can fight can go that route. And then the issue of markets is so important, and the government is negotiating within the East African bloc. We also have a law, the AGOA law, which has provided our sector with the markets in the US, where they sell their products. And we'd like to expand these markets so that at the end of the day, the sector grows bigger and bigger, and without impacts on the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Kartikeya. So India is not only a big producer of textiles, but it's also now a huge market for textiles, and that's ever increasing with the growing middle class. So is India on a pathway to linear, or is there something in the Indian culture that would make it feasible to not pursue a linear model and think more circular? What's the kind of dimensions that you're seeing now, and what do you think we can do to kind of push it towards that more circular?
Thank you. I think, like many traditional societies, India's textiles was very much in a circular mode. So much of our clothes were unstitched. So a sari, for instance, or a dhoti or a pagdi or something, it fits all. And the fashion comes with the way you wear something rather than inherent to the textile. So you would hardly ever find something like that being thrown away, not given. It would be passed on from generation to generation. Even the way we made textile, the handloom traditions, were very much careful of the environment. So there is a history there.
Yeah.
But the thing is, can that history survive modernism, people living in nuclear families, people who can't really store? What would they do? And I think that is the big challenge to India. So I think inherently there is a circularity which is there. But how do you change that? There are, for instance, now websites which enable you to exchange. But for textiles, it's more difficult. So you need places where you can come and leave things, for instance. Starting in schools, school uniforms. For instance, textbooks in schools are now not thrown away because there is already a tradition that after you finish your year, you can leave the textbook and it can go to somebody else. Now, can the same thing be true of uniforms, for instance? And can you get this thing right at the young age where people find that there is a purpose to it? And I think we need to get the rhetoric right, that it's not a tradition which you're following, but you're doing something which is good for the planet, which I think all these children now, environmental education, by the way, in India is compulsory at all levels of schooling. So you need to make that connection between their action and what they do. So that's what I think we are working on and looking towards.
Do you think the rest of the world could learn from the traditions of India?
I think the rest of the world can, certainly in 2015, for instance, at the Paris COP, what the Prime Minister of India said was, let's share with the world some of our traditions. And so we brought out a book on parampara, which is what India gave to others. But when I say that, I must say that almost all traditions around the world were circular at some stage.
They were better, yeah.
It's not something very special to India. What is special to India is that many of our traditions have not changed.
Yeah.
We've had almost a 5,000-year continuous thing. So some of the things you see are probably done exactly the way they were done, say, 500 years ago. And that's the difference. It's not something just unique to India. I'm sure all the countries had ways in which you did things, which you forget. But, I mean, look at the way, for instance, when Levi's thought of developing this fabric for the gold rush in San Francisco, and he made the jeans, he made it so that it would last. And he made it in such a way that it became a fashion, so even if it's torn, it still looks good. So now what does the fashion industry do with that? So what they did was, instead of accepting that's thing, they said, no, we have to create machines which will cut up clothes. And now you take a very sustainable idea and make it this. So I actually proposed to Levi's that why don't you have your new jeans, which are in any case made in India or Bangladesh or somewhere, let Indian youth wear them for 3 years, get them back, wash them, and then give it and sell it abroad. And you can even put a little label. Now that is a circular idea of what we are doing in any case now, and it will be wonderful.
I think we need to share this immediately to the rest of the fashion industry.
Maybe this conference can
exactly.
recommend this to the
children. We'll be sharing it, don't worry. This is fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, Federica, back down to you. Thank you. So, it's very hard to pivot from that. So, Federica, we've talked a little about collaboration already, and we've touched on the role that policymakers can play in actually facilitating change and creating the conditions for change. But what do you think is the current situation in terms of the textile sector, the private sector, companies like Levi's, collaborating with policymakers? And how do we make that better? Because there is some connection, but it's not optimal. How do we make sure that we facilitate that conversation further?
It's not optimal, and I'm saying not because I'm very much an optimistic, but this is very extremely wonderful momentum for the policy maker and and the industry collaboration. First of all, after so many years in the making, we saw the light in March of the EU strategy for circular and sustainable textile. And so GFA and Policy Hub, for which GFA is one of the co-founder, actually had a constant dialogue with policy maker to give input. Just to give you a little bit of context, Policy Hub, which, as I said, it was co-founded by different organizations, among which Global Fashion Agenda represents 700, more than 700 of brands, manufacturers, retailers, and other actors, and represent more than 50% of the footwear and apparel industry. So having a dialogue with us, the Policy Hub, it's really making those legislators aware of what is happening. And so we would like to continue, and we're willing to continue working with them and having more dialogue because there is still a lot to do. First of all, we are very we applaud the EU strategy as it was created, and because it has the goal of creating a circular and climate neutral economy. The strategy provides a solid foundation at the EU level that clarifies how the horizontal initiative impacting our sector will tie it all together, which is very important. We are supportive of the Commission approach covering the entire life cycle of the product, and so garment and footwear in specific. And most importantly, we welcome the direction of the EU Commission that is taking regarding the transparencies versus the consumers, which include the recognition and the shift towards a digital labeling. But as you know, this EU strategy, and here is a little bit of the challenge, is not as legally binding as such, and so we need that this strategy go through the European Parliament and the Member States. So the most important work now is that we need to make sure that those measures are adopted in the singular states in a way that are coherent and proportionate. Now, the good thing is that EU is paving the way for the rest of the globe, but the globe and the progress that is made there, so India, Kenya, US, there are so many other areas where this progress is needed. So forum like this one, for example, international work where we can discuss those topics are crucial. Because without that, so we cannot really move the needle. It's not just one region. We're very proud, of course, that EU can pave the way, but we really need to tie together a sustainable textile and value chain globally.
Thank you very much. Just to warn you, by the way, this segment is should be called "Hey Policymakers, we need more help," because you're about to hear quite a few questions to that theme. And actually, we have one sort of official policymaker among us, so I might turn to you now just to help us add a bit of meat to the bones here, because we know that. It's not just about individual national governments, it's also about the coordination between governments to make sure that the global dynamics actually work. So we need, the way that regulations pan out in the value chain, we need to make sure, for example, that, the products are compatible between markets, the labeling is compatible between markets, and that also we avoid, trade-offs around workplaces so that, if one country legalizes enforces a policy, it doesn't reduce jobs in some other country. So how do we get governments talking to each other better? Because it's all very well to do national level policy, which is great, or even regional EU policy, which is great, but we actually need a global picture around textiles policy.
Thank you. Trading among countries is such a critical aspect in the growth of the textile sector. because of the role it plays in ensuring that our people are engaged in the jobs and they get incomes from their practice. And how do we ensure that our products from Kenya are finding the markets outside Kenya? What Kenya is doing is we belong to blocks, like we belong to the East African bloc, and so we are busy negotiating within the blocks based on our products, our standards, and so this is one of the areas that we deliberate on issues to do with trade. As I said, Kenya has a law on promotion of our products in the American market, what we call the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which provides our people with access. It's a negotiation between Kenya and the US so that their products get into that market. And of course, even as we do this, we are aware that these days the issue of sustainability, green circular economy, the issue of green jobs, child labor, these are issues that are key in many countries. And so we must also make sure that our laws also integrate some of these best practices. Interestingly, in Kenya, whatever convention that Kenya ratifies, it automatically gets enforced through our constitution. And so for Kenya, we don't have a major challenge because the international law automatically becomes Kenyan law. And so we quickly transition. But however, we still need to customize our laws so that we provide an enabling environment. For example, providing incentives to the sector so that they are able to produce more. And also we have to deliberately look for markets for the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Kartikeya, we can pass the mic to you. So, we've really touched on some of the dimensions around sort of the cultural roots of circularity in India. But if we're thinking about the fact that actually some of those roots have been a bit lost now, we are shifting more towards that linear approach. What do you see as the role of, again, the policymakers or kind of those involved in capacity building and education, but like what could the policy framework do to actually help shift back towards a more circular and sustainable model?
Yeah, so you need policy which supports circularity. Today there are lots of contradictions in our policies.
Yeah.
So you would find things which are completely unsustainable being subsidized. And something which is subsidized, it's not. You might be promoting it, but there is not an economic model. So I think you need to bring that back. For instance, we have the GST, the tax on things. Now one of the suggestions is, can we reduce it for any garment or anything which is circular, which is reused, for instance? Can we change that structure? That alone would give it a push. But we must realize that circularity in the textile industry as a whole is not only with finished products. So, for instance, there was this mill which came, and I was involved in giving them an environment clearance. And they said, look, we are not cutting any trees, there's no wildlife. What's the problem? I said, the problem is that the amount of water you draw out will make 80 villages, all their wells will go dry. And they said, oh, we never realized that. So we said, you go back to the drawing board. Yeah. Interestingly, they came back in 3 months with 95% of the water being circular, being reused. They gave a guarantee that if any of these villages, the water goes down, then we will repair it. And they found themselves to be so successful that now they are starting consulting with this technique. So they've got another company which consults on circularity of water. Now that's the way to go, I think. It is to make a challenge to people who are not used to thinking this way, that you come out with a solution rather than a top-down thing that you should do this. And that is something. Circularity and sustainability in textiles. Also, for instance, we found that many indigenous varieties of cotton are disappearing because everyone is buying BT cotton, where there are also some incentives. So through another organization, we've got one whole area to start growing one of the indigenous Kala cottons, and then you have to find designers who get interested in that fabric, and then you have to get consumers to start using it. Now, you must realize that India's independence, textile played a huge role, because when Gandhi came to India in 1915, he was looking for something with which he could say boo, if you like, to the British. And all the cloth, textile, cotton was going, made into textiles in Manchester and being sold back. So he said we can each make our own yarn through the charka, the hand spinning wheel. So when people wore that, it was not just textiles they were wearing. They were wearing freedom, independence, decentralization, dignity. That's what they were wearing. Now, the fashion industry also makes you feel what you're wearing because of the ad you've seen. You feel good or bad, or you feel adventurous or whatever else, because it's been thrown into your head that if this is that. Now, if we can do that same thing for circularity, because I think the youth today are being aware of environment and sustainability, if they can realize that it is good to do this, and we can find ways. And then there are also infrastructure, like you need a place to where you can exchange clothes. Now in plastics, this is happening in a major way, where people are collecting plastic. They all know that it needs to be recycled. But in textiles, not so much yet, because there was a tradition of doing it. So can we develop this infrastructure? Can we get, for instance, all students of fashion, can at least one of their courses be one where they start, where the raw material is not plain cloth, but is used garments? And can they design things from that? Just one of their requirements for a degree is to be able to do that. It starts getting into their conscience that this is something which you have to do. That you don't only start with, shall I say, virgin textile, but you also start with something else. And get children to also do it. Now, when you have things like this, what you're wearing, for instance, you can throw another scarf around and it'll look very different. So can we have fashion in such a way that you can mix and match your own stuff more than completely designed things where you can't really do much with it? So I think there's a great scope for this, and I think this is one of those things where education plays a huge role because it is where people do things with it. You can't do this only a top-down. It is where you involve the user in thinking of fashion differently, in saying it, and I'm sure that the industry and the fashion designers will respond to it. I think so. So it's an exciting time, if you like, of taking tradition aspects of it, but taking that idea. I suppose that itself is circularity, the old idea, and putting it into a new form, because now people like to see something on an app to see what can I do with this, And I think there is this potential. So I see a great possibility of textile circularity. The problem one which we saw, which was on one of your slides, was microplastics. And we've still not worked out, because wearing a cotton alone thing is still a luxury, because I have to wash it and iron it. And for many people, taking a polyester blended cloth, they can wear it more often. So for them, there's a sort of economic sense. But at the same time, the microplastic problem is there. So we are still scratching our heads, and that's where good R&D is required. You need maybe a washing machine which will filter this out, or something, or some other techniques. So there's also good R&D which is required in this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I think what's so great about what you've touched on is that there's this balance between top-down, structured government regulation, new policies, like well thought through policy frameworks that are not inconsistent, and then this bottom-up creativity that needs to happen, and leaving space for that. And I think that's the huge challenge of regulating well, is to leave enough space for the bottom-up stuff, but to do enough at the top level.
Exactly.
So I think this is
a very participatory way. You can really organize this, and government actually facilitating rather than over specifying.
Yeah.
Because as I said, I gave an example, industry is creative, people are creative, and let's use that creativity to do this new transformation which we need.
So actually, we've got two final questions that speak to that perfectly. So if we want to go, so first of all, you're working a lot with young people, and we see that young people are incredibly creative and passionate and driven when it comes to sustainability issues. So thinking about this bottom-up creative surge that we need in order to transform this industry, what role do you think that youth engagement and activism is changing consumption? I mean, in Bangladesh as an example, but sort of with a global scope.
So this question has become very tricky for me because I belong to youth community, and youth being the 40% of the global total population are one of the largest plastic producer, or waste producer in the world. And youth tends to more westernized, lifestyle, and we are literally in living in urban world where we are more, we tend to buy products which are ready made and which are, comes with a lot of plastic. So it has been a challenge being a youth to, our young people to be more conscious and follow the principles of sustainable lifestyle. On the other hand, there's many youth that are actually leading the change in different countries, specifically as you were talking about asking about Bangladesh. There are many entrepreneurs. They're coming up now with the idea to not to throw anything which are coming as the leftovers after producing maybe some certain kind of products. So they are actually using those leftovers or the byproducts and creating new products and trying to find the markets and selling those in different countries. And some of the examples are like in different villages of Bangladesh, there are something like there are many products being produced, with jute, which is like replacing the plastic and other things. So those are being introduced in the European market and being liked or loved by the Europeans and being bought by them. So which is actually creating more opportunities for the young women or girls who are actually working in this sector and producing those things. And apart from that, obviously they have more access to the technology, and they have more more passion for the environment, that Sar was saying. So there are a lot of young people, they are actually raising the awareness, and that has resulted that out of 10 top greenest factories, Bangladesh was the 7 out of 10 in the world. So many Bangladeshi youth, they are leading the change, but still we have to walk a long way to make sure that not just in Bangladesh, this change is happening in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Meta, so thinking slightly more top-down now, just because I think for a lot of the work that the ILO does, I mean, actually, this is a sidebar, but it could be that you have a lot of bottom-up creative stuff that you're doing, but it feels to me like there's quite a lot of top-down needed as well. So, how do we coordinate, I guess, first of all, the top-down level to make sure that we do deliver on this just transition that we know is so important? But I mean, if you want to touch on the creative stuff too, I guess.
Yeah, for sure, Leila. I mean, we're super creative. No, but actually we do have quite a lot of innovation initiatives in the ILO and things like that. And I think what we're really trying to do is also leverage the creativity and the knowledge and the ability of our constituents. So compared to other UN agencies, that does not only include governments, but also workers and employers. So these businesses that we're talking about. But Leila, since I'm the last one, I'm going to actually take the advantage of reacting to some of the things that the people here in the panel have said. So first of all, I think that it was really interesting to hear the examples from India, and I love how you gave concrete examples on some of the core principles of circularity. I mean, you talked about, how a certain item, a piece of clothing or cloth can be worn in several ways. So reusability, the way that it was produced, being way more sustainable and resource efficient. You talked about basically introducing and reintroducing native cotton, types of cotton. This is linked to biodiversity, regenerative agriculture. So in that sense, I just think I want to thank you for those really great examples, because I'm going to cherish them. I also wanted to point to something that Suhair said, because, I mean, initially I said include those that have most at stake, right? And I highlighted governments, workers, and employers. But of course, I'm ashamed to not have included youth here, right? Because they do have, as I said, everything to gain and all the power to change as well. And I also wanted to just say that you highlighted ease of doing business, and you highlighted entrepreneurship and incentives, things like that. And I really want to encourage the youth to revisit the Just Transition guidelines that we have in the ILO, because they cover all those points. So here I will segue into your question. How are we going to do this, and how can we best leverage it? And as I mentioned, the Just Transition guidelines, they cover 9 different policy areas. I mean, employment, entrepreneurship, enterprise development, all those things are covered in that, including important topics like social protection, which we had not had the chance to talk about now, because when we transition, then we also have to make sure that we get everyone on board. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight, which I think maybe hopefully binds all of our conversation today together, is one of the guiding principles, which is policy coherence. And this, I think, hopefully can underline the importance, because when we talk about a just transition and when we talk about circularity, it's not only the industry, the Ministry of Industry, or maybe you even have a Ministry of Textiles, or what do I know in your specific country. It's cross-cutting, right? So you really want to include things like education, for example. And what we see in the ILO data is that there's still a huge disconnect between the different line ministries. So something that we really work with our constituents on is the improved coordination between the line ministries that are relevant to the transition and that are relevant to sustainability. So and what we also see is that when you link, for example, the Ministry of Environment closer with the Ministry of Education, you also see that the skills gap that the businesses need to transition is reduced, and you also see that the skills that, for example, young people, but also people that are being reskilled, they become more employable. So I think in terms of supporting the transition, this policy coherence is really key. Yeah. So thanks so much for having me and learning so much from everyone here in the panel as well.
It's been such a good panel. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been amazing. So I think we are very close to the end of our time. We maybe have time for one question, if anybody has a burning question. Everybody's very shy. No? Oh, no. In which case...
Just make a quick comment.
Yes,
Say
please.
if you've got a question.
Yeah. We need to give the microphone. Sorry.
I was just wondering, so there's a lot of subcontracting going on in the industry. So how are you envisioning policies that are making sure that these workers will be able to get a fair pay? Because, there's a lot of transparency, of course, missing in that sense.
That does feel like a meta question. That's okay. Unless anybody else desperately wants to.
Yeah, thank you. She's a paid actor. I tipped her to ask that question. No, thank you so much, and thank you again. I think this circles back to what I said initially, which is that when we talk about not only circularity but also the textiles industry, the topic of employment and decent work is really key. And here I can just only say that the best way that we can ensure this is to support decent work. It is to include the social partners, ensuring that there is the right to unionize and that both workers and employers are involved in this, because you can see social dialogue both happening on national level with the government, but to a large degree, a lot of social dialogue and tackling these kind of issues, they happen on a company level. So ensuring that there are the right legislation, that there is the room for creating decent work, that is the best way to address things like that. And that actually reminded me that I think to your example from India, where we have all these examples from circularity, I think from our perspective, the only thing that is lacking in that story is the working condition, right? So as we transition to circularity, we want to make sure that we are innovative and that we do think circularity at the beginning of the design phase, because we see that there are the environmental case, the environmental benefits from a circular economy. We see the business case now, also businesses starting to see that it is profitable, it shows on the bottom line. But what we're really missing here is the human case, and that is the jobs element and the social element of it. So I think as we are preaching to think about resource efficiency at the beginning of the design phase, let's make sure that we also bring in the people that are going to make the circular economy work already in the design phase.
Sorry, let me add one more thing for you, because it's very important before I pass it to... so first of all, thank you. I said in my closing remark last year at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, now we call it Global Fashion Summit, that these social issues are less glamorous, but the most elegant of all. And that's the way I think we should reconsider society. It's very important that we take tradition, but also nature itself to create innovation. However, without the social. So one of the things that I'm very proud is that Global Fashion Agenda had before as a vision to put sustainability as a priority. We think that now the priority is like mission accomplished. We did that. So we want, as a new vision now, we have the net positive for people and planet, and where the social is becoming more and more of a priority. So I'm glad, but of course, there is a lot of work to do. And young people, be actor, be protagonist, and may help to make the change. We're trying to help here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Federica. You've been asking me for a closing.
Just very...
30 seconds.
We are doing a very interesting project with UNEP,
Yeah.
taking a whole city, which is a textile hub, and looking at circularity, which is not seeing it just from industry or the workers and everything else, but seeing a totality. And I think that approach has been very useful, because then you get every one of the stakeholders involved in evolving a new ecosystem, if you like, for how textiles would be manufactured, how they are reused, how the recycling works and everything else. And I think we need to understand, because it goes right from the person who grows the cotton all the way to the person who stitches that garment. And I think that's what we're doing this time.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I feel like I should give everybody more time, but I'm going to get told off. So thank you so much to our panel. And I'd now like to welcome up Robert Watts to give us some very, hopefully brief, closing remarks. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thanks.
I think we can head down. Yeah.
Thank you very much. What a fantastic panel we've just had there. Yes, my name is Robert Watt. I'm from Stockholm Environment Institute. I'm going to start by telling you a very short story, which is that I was responsible for the opening ceremony for the Action Hub. And of course, with an open ceremony, what do? You cut a ribbon of some sort. So we had a ribbon that looked like this. Here we are, an upcycled ribbon made of scraps of cloth sewn together by my kids.
Child labour! She's going to come for you.
I'll run that day. But I wanted to start off because I think one of the things that I was struck by was talk about culture and identity. And start with that. And I wanted to say that there is a growing interest in living sustainability, and having a sustainable lifestyle. And I think there's a word that we need to use much more, especially in the global north, especially among those who consume things, that is sufficiency. A sufficiency lifestyle, not just a sustainable lifestyle. And that's something that's highlighted in this report, which SEI produced before Stockholm was 50, all unlocking a better future. Now, there are three keys to unlocking a better future in here. One of those keys is prosperity that lasts for all. And there are three elements I just want to highlight which really resonate, I think, with what we've heard today. One is making sustainable lifestyles an easy choice. And there are some recommendations there about having a local policy labs in order that we can actually learn from each other, that we can really find the solutions that work on the ground. But then at the global level, thinking about having perhaps imposing a permanent at a UN level on sustainable lifestyles, where we can really take that to another level and identify what collaborations and what roadblocks need to be removed to enable the lifestyles to be that easy choice. We need to also make sure that supply chains are working for everybody. They're working for workers, but they're also delivering goods. And one thing I heard from our Kenyan colleague here was the work that they've done on mapping value and making markets. And I think that the key there is that's actually opening up the opportunity to have new value, new jobs, and new supply chains. So that's another great example. And then function, purpose and function, not product. And that comes a little bit down again to what I started off, which was language, which was culture. I've got this great little graphic in here that I'd like to just show you here, which is all about how to change the language that we use to do with consumption. And actually that can really also begin to unlock some of the behavioural change that consumption play on. I'm going to wrap up by saying that I felt that there were two sets of polarities, things that need to be balanced, that may feel as though they are in opposition, but actually need to be combined. One is global, local, and the other is regulate, create. And the global, local, I thought the example that we heard about the importance of making the sums add up for secular business models was really important. We need to think locally about some of those, whether that's VAT locally, or we need to actually look at what maybe there are some trade barriers that are making those business models difficult to scale. Then I love this example about entrepreneurship with youth and the need that they should have support. Almost like government needs both to be there, but also get out their way when they actually want to have that creativity as well. And we must never forget just transition. The numbers that Betty shared were actually sobering in the sense that it's hard to say whether you're going to gain jobs. It's hopefully neutral, but there will be a real shift, and we need to be very careful about that. And what I perhaps didn't hear enough about was the gender aspect of some of that shift. Love to think about that. Closing off just by saying that another piece of work that I've been involved with is the Stockholm Action Agenda, transforming global value chains. We looked at textiles, we looked at 5 other value chains. We identified some levers that can make a difference. Then we also realised that those levers are not enough on their own, and that you need some global action really to bring full force into those levers. One of the things we propose is a circularity program, something that goes beyond what I talked about before, a sort of forum for sustainable lifestyle, something that goes beyond what I thought was really interesting, this coordination mechanism that we heard you talking about right at the start, and something that really goes there and says, here are some roadblocks at a global level that need to be removed in order for the business models to really take hold and be scaled everywhere. Thank you very much for listening. I have a hashtag I've been using for the action card. It comes from